Okay, we still have folks loading in, but we're going to go ahead and start it. We will try and make sure we're on time as always. We're very happy to be able to bring to you today two of the folks that were not just the masterminds, but actually delivered such a great election experience for our voters in Harris County with the highest number of voters ever. And the promise, because it was so easy, it worked so well, it worked so efficiently, and it was so safe that our voter turnout, which is so critical to our democracy, and then also obviously the Democratic Party, will continue. Chris Hollins is the clerk who did this along with a team of many folks across many different agencies. He's a fourth generation Texan, graduate of Hightower. He also had as an active practice that he put on hold more or less to do this public service. We're hopeful that he'll announce something big today, but he's told us he's probably not going to do that. He's focusing on other things like catching up, finishing out the election in golf, which I don't blame him. Thank you so much for joining us, Chris, and we're happy to hear what you did and what you think is going to happen going down the road. Thank you.
All right, and Mike, in a moment here, I'm going to pass the baton over to Constable Rosen. Why don't you give his introduction now as well, and then when we get to the appropriate moment, I'll hand it over to him.
Well, and in large part because I promised him this had to be the case. Constable Rosen has been a foundational member of the Democratic Party's elected officials, but what's important for him is the bonding that his office has had for so long and has continued to develop with the community. He's very active, not just obviously with the broader community. He's on the Beth Yashurin, very active there, but probably most important for our members, one in particular, he's also the son-in-law of our 2019 Clarence Darrow Award winner, Ambassador Arthur Schechter, who I know is going to have a great question for the Constable today, and I've already warned him about. And we're really so proud of such a great job him and his team have done to represent what Democratic elected officials, particularly in law enforcement, can really do and do their job so effectively, so well with the community. And thank you for joining us, Constable Rosen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Mike. Thanks to all of you for being here this afternoon. I, of course, am a proud member of HCDLA, in addition to serving as Vice Chair for Finance at the Texas Democratic Party. But in my current role as County Clerk, my job is to serve all voters here in Harris County, to protect their right to vote, and to ensure that they can vote safely, conveniently, and with the peace of mind that their votes are going to be counted. And that's what led us to where we are today. In just a few short months, our office moved Harris County to the leading edge of voter access in this country. And it turns out that when you make voting easier for folks, they vote. So more than 1.65 million Harris County residents made their voices heard in our November election, which is more than 2/3 of registered voters here in Harris County. We have, getting towards 2.5 million registered voters now. And we saw more than 300,000 additional voters beyond the turnout that we saw in 2016. This came for a number of reasons. The first time ever we offered 24-hour voting. That's never happened in Texas before. For the first time ever, we offered drive-thru voting services. And I know, that was very interesting over the last few weeks from a legal perspective. But we knew that the law was on our side, and we delivered. We tripled the number of early voting centers across the county. And we heard so many inspiring stories from first-time voters and from those who would not have been able to vote without the innovative and practical solutions that our team put forward, and that our commissioners court, our Democratic commissioners court, supported. Just a couple of stories. There were welders and electricians who voted at 2 a.m. during 24-hour voting, who wouldn't have been able to vote had they not had that moment when they got off their shifts. There was a nurse who's been working 12 to 14-hour shifts back to back since February, who cried when she found out that she could vote at the Texas Medical Center at a time that worked for her extremely demanding schedule. So many different folks had family members who were immunocompromised, who told me, because I went to every single voting center during early voting, all 122 of them, and all 10 drive-through voting centers. But I had drive-through voters who told me that they had family members who were immunocompromised, And that drive-through voting allowed them to spend time with their family without fear that they might be serving as a conduit for this deadly virus. The mother with small children who was able to vote drive-through and not put her family's safety at risk. The veteran with PTSD who wouldn't have voted if he had to walk in to a voting center. And so, you know, drive-through voting in particular was just a phenomenal success. The number one question that I got when talking to voters was, why haven't we done this before in Harris County? And can you promise that we're going to do it again? And, you know, for one, I hope that the question, you know, the answer to the latter question is yes. But for all those great services and the smooth and safe election that we administered, that didn't come out of nowhere. It came from a plan. On June 15th of this year, which was 2 weeks after I began my tenure as county clerk, I issued the Safe Elections Plan. And SAFE is an acronym that stands for safe, secure, accessible, fair, and efficient. And, you know, during the time of COVID-19, our top priority was to ensure that voters would not have to make the decision between their health and their constitutional right to vote. And from there, you know, we worked to make sure that voting would be convenient, accessible, and secure. I know so many of us remember the long lines at TSU back in March. And so, you know, that was bulletin board material for us to say, this cannot happen again. You know, many of us remember back in November of 2019, when it took an extraordinary amount of time to report the results of the election, going into the following day. And that was also bulletin board material, something that we wanted to make sure that we reverse course on. And so, you know, our Safe Elections Plan encompassed 24 distinct initiatives, all of which had cross-functional teams set up against them to ensure proper delivery. And so I'm just going to highlight some of the things that we did here. You know, with regard to safety, all of our election workers were provided with protective equipment, and so was every voter who needed it, from face masks to finger covers, plexiglass, hand sanitizer, alcohol wipes. We did everything that we could do to make the voting environment safe. We also pushed for an extended voting period so that voters could be more spaced out as they cast their ballots. You know, Governor Abbott obliged, and he extended the early voting period to 18 days. That was a bipartisan effort that should make Texas proud, but of course his own party turned against him and in fact mandamused him and myself to try and reverse that. But we are fortunate that stood. We also encouraged those who were eligible to vote from home. And I know that so many lawyers voted from home because many of them were calling me to personally check that we had their mail ballot. And it was great that they did that. You know, my first act in public office was to send vote by mail applications to every single registered voter in the county who was over the age of 65. Over 250,000 Harris County voters eventually requested a mail ballot, and over 170,000 of them voted by mail. Both of those are records, and both of those resulted in our voters and our voting centers being safer during the election period. We had protocols in place where our election workers were screened daily for temperature and for symptoms. There were 3 instances where election workers had symptoms or tested positive for coronavirus. And in each of those instances, we were able to pause services at those sites, send those teams out to get rapid testing, sanitize the voting centers, bring in an entirely new team of election workers, and get the voting center back up and running within an hour. It was truly impressive. And again, of course, we did that to keep everyone safe. That was our number one commitment. Regarding security, when it comes to, you know, the technology that we used, we utilized a fully closed system where no voting machine, no tally equipment at all was ever connected to the internet. And so we made sure that this election was ours, nobody else's, and that we kept it that way. Our mail ballots that came in were secured in lock boxes. Those boxes were kept in a locked cage, and that cage was under 24-hour camera surveillance and personal surveillance by none other than the office of Constable Rosen. I know, you know, we did even more when it came to personal security. And so I'm going to pause here because I know that Constable Rosen has a lot more to say about the unprecedented work and partnership that we had here in Harris County to make this election physically safe for all of our voters and election workers. And so with that, I'll let Constable Rosen jump in.
Thank you so much, Chris. And it's so good to be here with the Harris County Democratic Lawyers Association. I'm not a stranger to this organization. And I do want to point out, Chris, your leadership on this election was superb. You did a great job of organizing everything, and we were a component of it. And we worked collaboratively. We worked through problems. We shared the same philosophy in terms of ensuring that people didn't feel any kind of pressure or anything at the polls, which is why the plan kind of came together as it did. And I do think that this plan should be replicated and used all over the country, because I think it was exceptional. But it did take partners, it did take people working together and for one goal. And that's what the most important thing. So congratulations to you on a job well done of ensuring that we had a great election. This plan, our portion of it, we initially met at the behest of Terry O'Rourke with the County Attorney's Office, who brought some principals together to include the District Attorney's Office, the County Attorney's Office, the County Clerk's Office, fellow law enforcement partners. And we got in a room and started talking about the what ifs. What if this happens? What if that happens? And we sat around and said, okay, it's time to put together a very comprehensive plan. So we first initially conceptualized back in September 20th of this year, and then we started the work on October the 12th. And it terminated, of course, at the end of the election, really on the 5th of November. As I said earlier, it's the Precinct 1 Constable's Office led the law enforcement effort on this. And I worked very closely with all of our local and regional, state and federal partners. We wanted to start gathering intelligence both nationally, statewide, and locally, so we could synthesize that intel and be ready for anything that was going to be disruptive to this election. So we started in on the intel dive of finding out throughout all of our law enforcement community, what are we hearing? What are people saying, and what can we anticipate as being a security problem or a law enforcement problem? And so we started putting together a plan, and we worked very closely in putting together a very comprehensive written plan that we would execute at the beginning of early vote. So I'll start at the beginning of early vote. We had a lot of assets, and one of the most important thing that we all felt was important was that officers weren't there in a uniform. We didn't want anybody feeling intimidated. We didn't want anybody to feel scared to come vote. And so the single most important thing that we did was have plainclothes officers that the public never saw. You never knew that they were there, but they were. And we started looking at past polling places that had problems and tried to see if there's a trend at any of the polling places where historically from past elections, we saw problems. And so we were able to ensure that somebody stayed focused on those polls where in the past they've had some problems. So we started looking at everything that we could, both intel-wise and any historical data that would help us plan as efficiently as possible. So we wanted to make sure the officers were there, but they were not seen. So we put together a cheat sheet for all the election judges and all the people that are going to be working the polls, which essentially gave them a number to call in the event that they had a problem that required a law enforcement attention. If it was the district attorney's office where they needed to speak to somebody in intake, a lawyer, if there was a voter suppression issue or any kind of legal issue that involved more of civil law, but election law, we would plug people into the county attorney's office. And then, of course, the county clerk's office, which was running the entire election. So we put together a command post that went live on early vote, first day of early vote. And that command post was open and active about an hour before the polls opened and an hour or two after the polls closed. And it was a one-stop shop for anybody that had any election related issue could call into that command center and get a response from the appropriate agency for whatever the issue was that the polling location had. I'm happy to report, we did and conducted people didn't know, but 343 bomb sweeps of polling locations prior to voters getting to the polls. We wanted to make sure that nobody left anything behind that would cause disruption to this election. So we had bomb dogs out every morning at 4 in the morning, actually going to different polling locations and sweeping them for potential bombs or anything else. So that was happening actively every day. We had, during the entire election process, we had 6,200 polling checks. So we actually divided the county up into north, south, east, and west quadrants, and a team was assigned to each quadrant, and they were responsible for everything that happened at polling locations within their quadrant. So if there was an immediate need, let's say that there was a, God forbid, an active shooter at a polling location or a disturbance in progress at a polling location, we could call our local law enforcement partner to send resources there immediately. Then, of course, the voter election team, law enforcement side, would go to the poll and actually take the case over from the responding agency, and then we would work the investigation. Any and all investigations that required further work to be done, our office handled that. I'm happy to report there were 79 total incidents, not that really required law enforcement, only 20 required law enforcement. So 20 investigations out of a historic vote is unprecedented. It just goes to show how important planning is. And so we currently have 20 open investigations, most of which, I will say 15 of them, really involve something de minimis, like someone running over somebody, an opponent's signs, somebody touching a voter, somebody breaking the 100-foot rule. So most of those we were able to dispose of, and we have about 5 other cases that are going to require additional longer-term investigation, but I can tell you they are being thoroughly investigated. We're talking to every witness. We want to button these things up, and we want to talk to everybody, because we don't want anybody making any kind of an allegation that somehow this election wasn't fair, or it was rigged, or there was voter suppression, any of that. It's terribly important to have that transparency when you're talking about such an important constitutional right of voting. So we currently have about 5 investigations that are going to continue on. Hopefully we're going to put them to bed before Thanksgiving. That's our goal, at least internally. Every day that voting was open, that polls were open, we would have a Zoom call at 11 with all of our partners. So those are the district attorney's office, county attorney's office, county clerk's office, all the support staff, local law enforcement. Houston PD was on those calls every day. DPS was on those calls every day. And we were talking every day about everything that was going on in the polls, from things that were, again, were de minimis to things that were more important and required greater attention. So that was important to get done. So I'm extremely happy to report that 20 investigations after what, 1.4 million plus voters voted. It's just incredible. So every day at 11 and 4, we would have a Zoom call. If anything happened actively during the day where there was some problem at a polling location, we had a Monstra notification system that it would not only notify all of our partners, but it would also notify the officers in the street that were actually out at the polling locations. So there was constant communication going on. So from that perspective, it was great. Intel sharing. Every day we would get more and more intel that was being shared with this core group of people. And so that made it successful. And so, it's just so important to know that this was a successful election because of the planning that went into it. Every day we again had this command center opened up, and people were able to call into our dispatch center, and then our dispatch center, which was open 24 hours a day, would send the call over to our command center. So we did get contacted by other jurisdictions. Tarrant County, Fort Bend County often was on these Zoom calls with us. I know the district attorney at Fort Bend County participated in multiple Zoom calls during this because they wanted to see what was happening in our county. And we shared our operational plan with Fort Bend County, and then Tarrant County kind of at the end asked for a copy of it as well. We are so proud of the work that we did, and I do think that this model should be done nationally. I think I think the only thing, if we have lessons learned, and of course the group got back together for lessons learned and ways to improve this, I think the only thing that we probably should have done early before voting started is just kind of let the public know that you may not see us, but we're there, and your voting experience is going to be safe, secure. And we debated about that internally, and I'm just a big proponent that you make people feel very comfortable and at ease when they're going to vote. And I think that's the only thing next time I'm hopeful that we can communicate to the public, because I did get a lot of calls both from the party, the Democratic Party, and we got a lot of calls from the public saying, hey, is it safe? Are you hearing anything? Should I be nervous? And then especially at the end, because people were concerned that voters, if it didn't go their way, there would be some rioting or there would be some criminal activity that went on. There was some discussion that the governor was bringing troops in. I heard a lot of that. The governor's office just put together a plan in the event that there was something going on and nothing more. I can tell you that the district attorney's office, county attorney's office, county clerk's office, and all of our partners were in sync, communicating every day. And I was so proud to be a part of this historic election from the security standpoint and ensuring that it was safe and secure. So with that, I'm going to pitch it back over to Chris or Mike and take questions if anybody has any.
Well, I'll continue just a few more words. So we've covered safety and security. On access, I've touched base on this already, but we tripled the number of early voting centers from just over 40 in 2016 to over 120 here in 2020. We expanded those hours in the last week of early voting. We offered drive-through voting, where roughly 1 in 10 of all in-person votes across Harris County were cast at drive-through voting centers. When it comes to fairness, none of this work that we were doing would be helpful to Harris County voters if they didn't know that this stuff existed. And so we expanded dramatically our communications and outreach efforts, particularly to those communities that may not speak English, like the Vietnamese community, the Spanish community, the Chinese community, and so many others. We had over 50 billboards around town. We had PSA after PSA. Our Twitter account caught fire, and was, I think there have been numerous articles written about our social media efforts during this time. And, I think those have been truly entertaining as well as informative. We actively sought and incorporated meaningful feedback from our stakeholders, not only, our commissioners court, but so many voting rights groups and civil rights groups, both that are based, here in Houston or Texas, and also that span from coast to coast. And we made our plan better by having those folks directly involved. I think so often, and maybe the constable can relate to this, but you have these outside groups who have every criticism under the sun. And what we did from the beginning was we said, hey, we'll give y'all an update every couple of weeks if y'all would like, but if you want to be involved in this, come do the work. The meeting's at Tuesday at 10:30, and we can talk about where the voting center should be. We can talk about how many machines should be at every location, and you can be a part of that decision. And so by bringing in those groups, again, our answer was stronger. And then we had a team both within the county and well beyond, working together to serve the voters. And I think that was really fantastic. Small things like engaging the provisional voters. There are members of my staff driving around Houston and Harris County right now, knocking on doors and saying, hey, did you complete your statement of residence so that your vote will count? Or have you made it downtown to show your ID so that your vote will count? We didn't just stop, on the evening of November 3rd. This work will continue through the end of this canvass period. And then, other things that are so important that are not very sexy. The number one way that we reduce lines was to better allocate the voting machines. So sitting down, with data and analyzing heavily how many voting machines are needed at a given location due to traffic patterns and expectations. Similarly, with understanding how many poll workers that we would need, we ended up with well over 11,000 election workers, which was more than double anything that we had ever seen in Harris County history. And our ability to recruit that many people was questioned at the beginning of the summer. But we just continued to pound the pavement, and again, with support from so many other organizations, it's hard to even fathom, how many different organizations stepped up to join the work that we were doing. From the sports teams, Houston Rockets, the Dash and the Dynamo, the Texans, to interfaith ministries, so many churches and mosques and temples and other places of worship that stepped up to be voting centers. So many organizations like the Houston Food Bank and others that again, they said, how can we help? Folks who sent in food and water for election workers and for voters who were standing in line, I think they were pleasantly surprised that there were no lines. And so that was really, really important. And then finally, just things like training, small things like optimizing our ballot. I was grateful to so many of our elected officials that I called up and I said, hey, we're trying to make our ballot shorter. You're unopposed, so you're going to be at the bottom of the ballot. You're not going to get any votes this election. And to a person, maybe there was one person who yelled at me, but most people said, absolutely, whatever we can do to make voting more efficient, safer for the people of Harris County, let's do it. And so, that plan came together well, from, the hundreds of workers here in the county clerk's office who've been doing this work day in and day out for years, who I was able to join and lead, to, the small team of thinkers and problem solvers that I brought in to help us, do this work as efficiently and effectively as possible, to the thousands of election workers, and of course, to all of our law enforcement partners and other partners who did fantastic work that often goes unrecognized to make this a safe and secure election. Again, I just want to thank you, Constable Rosen, and there are so many other debts of gratitude that are owed. But that is the short of what we did and how we did it, and I'm happy to take questions.
Well, as promised, we have a good crowd, and we do have one other person introduced who y'all are working for on a nonpartisan basis and doing an incredible job of reaching out to really everybody who, at least in theory, share the interest of a fair and full voting electorate and people getting out there. But from the party side, and on behalf of also the Harris County Democratic lawyers, Nicole Peterson, who is joining us briefly, is going to visit with you about what so many of our members also have joined in the effort to, and I've been involved in this for a number of years, and I've seen how when you have efforts to interfere at polls, if you don't have someone there to watch and at least provide the first level of defense, it helps your SAFE program do it. And Nicole, who started in a New York law firm, was incredibly vital and has a little bit to share about what she and her members, as well as other lawyers, have done to protect this election kind of on the ground, first level. And thank you for joining us, Nicole.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Mike. So our voter protection program was, I think, one of the biggest voter protection programs ever in Harris County for this general election. It was really a three-prong approach. Because Clerk Hollins had made more polling locations than before, we had a wonderful opportunity to staff those locations. And so we made a conscious decision to try to recruit as many lawyers and law students as possible to work as election judges and election clerks. And we were able to recruit nearly 200 lawyers and law students to do that work. I've said many times, every time I speak, I think I say this, that the most important thing anyone can do for voter protection is to be an election worker. So that work was vital. And I am extremely grateful to the members of this group of HCDLA and the Texas Democratic Lawyers Association who joined that effort. Our second prong were poll watchers. So we had almost 500 shifts of poll watching throughout early vote and on election day. Again, many of those volunteers are from this group, and I am grateful to you for that. But those poll watchers meant that we could have people throughout the entire county who could go not just to locations where problems had been reported or where we were perhaps worried that something might happen, but also just to go and kind of take the temperature of parts of the county and just see how things were running and if everything was running smoothly. Then as the third prong was our legal boiler room. So I had 10 to 12 attorneys, all with voter protection experience. We opened up our legal boiler room on the first day of early vote, and we ran it all the way through election day. So at any time, people could call HCDP, call their headquarters, and be connected with a voter protection attorney. In addition, we were resolving any of the issues that were reported to the Texas Democratic Party's hotline that had to do with Harris County. This meant that we were in a position that we could resolve many issues on our own immediately. And we had a lot of calls from judges who perhaps had questions or just needed a reminder about some part of the code. But also in large part because of Clerk Hollins' safe initiatives and the fact that we had been so involved from really since March in preparing for this election, I was able to speak with members of his staff and the county attorney staff and also Constable Rosen's staff, if necessary, throughout. I was receiving information just from all of these poll watchers, from the judges, and from just voters calling in. And so being able to relay that information to those groups just ended up being vitally important. And I think we were quite successful. And I think the proof of that is that election day was very quiet. We sat in our boiler room bored for most of the day. And to me, that means that we had the networks in place and we had done all the work ahead of time so that we could have a successful and easy election day. I just want to, before I go, I just want to very quickly thank both Harris County Democratic Lawyers Association and Texas Democratic Lawyers Association for all of your volunteers, but in particular, I want to thank Barbara, Mike, and Stephen, who really were instrumental in many ways, both supporting me and solving problems as they arose. So I did this work under the banner of the Harris County Democratic Party, who has been great through this whole thing. But also very much with the support of HCDLA. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Nicole. And I remember talking to you during the day, election day, and that was kind of I'm not going to say disappointing because I was out there at the polls when there was an extension given by Judge Phillips because they had problems in some of them. And there was real problems with voters kind of not being able to do what they wanted to do. Was that disappointing? Were you like ready, loaded for bear and unhappy that it didn't happen? Or in retrospect, what do you think?
By election day, I was pretty tired. So I was very happy that we did not have those calls. I mean, look, we want everyone to be able to vote. We want a quiet day, right? If it's quiet, it means that we were successful and we did everything we were supposed to do. So I was thrilled that we were bored on election day.
Well, thank you. And thank you for all you did all the way through, because that's a good point. And actually, I want to throw this out for both Chris and Nicole and Constable Rosen. And I think it's a question that kind of, as I saw how well it worked, and Nicole was talking about how quiet it was at points. Why didn't this happen before? Do you have any? And I'm not looking for blame, but why hasn't this become a best practice across the nation to do it? I mean, what's your thoughts on that at this point?
Well, I can tell you that from the county attorney's standpoint, they've always had a strike force. Every election, they've had a group of lawyers, and I think on a small scale, a group of investigators that were assigned to basically a strike team if in the event anything went on. But I think that we saw a polarization of our country. I think we saw a lot of competing interest. I think there was a lot of talk about voter suppression and different things that would come up. And because I think we're so polarized, some of the things that you had to be concerned with really played an integral role in this election. I mean, I just think there was a lot riding on this election. I think people were ready, as we could see by early vote day one, people were ready to vote. They were ready to cast their vote, and they wanted to get there as soon as the polls opened. And I think on election day, it's sort of like everybody was just spent. I was happy that election day was very quiet. We only had some microphone discussion at West Gray that went back and forth, and I went over there and told them to both shut their microphones off or their bully horns, and they complied without any problem. So I just think that we were polarized. I think that there was a lot of feeling about politics in our country and locally, and I think the pandemic also helps with that angst or that stress, and I just think that there was a lot of hateful stuff being talked about nationally and locally, and I think it was important that this group get assembled to ensure that nothing happened, at least from my perspective.
Thank you. Chris, do you have any kind of other thoughts on why they haven't done? I mean, obviously they didn't have you, but what else was it that kind of, why do you think this hasn't been done in this way before?
I'm speculating here, but I can tell you that, after a big election like this, a lot of time the natural response is relief. And, when you and I were talking earlier, and you asked what I was doing next, I talked about sleep and golf and some of these other things. I frankly don't think that enough attention is paid to, let's look back at our effort, do a postmortem and understand what we could have done better. Let's look across, the country to understand what other people are doing and, what we should be trying to emulate and what pitfalls we should be trying to avoid. And frankly, that was one of the first things that I did in office, was to say, okay, we're in this first time COVID election, but there have been other jurisdictions that have done this, some that did it all right, some that didn't. I want to talk to all of them and understand what happened in their situations. And so, we spoke with Maricopa County, we spoke with Miami-Dade, we spoke with numerous jurisdictions in Wisconsin. In fact, drive-thru voting came out of a conversation from Wisconsin, as well as a conversation with Ms. Debevoise over in Travis County. We talked with Orange County. And so, conversations like that need to happen. I understand that in non-COVID times, they have these county clerk conventions and whatnot. Who knows what actually takes place there, besides a lot of schmoozing. But, taking it's critical, and it's work that I'm going to be doing moving forward is sharing these ideas and allowing folks to pick this stuff up. Because again, our service, my personal service has been to Harris County, right? But there's no reason why this couldn't serve Texans at large and Americans at large if those additional elections administrators could pick those up, as well as if we could have a renewed Voting Rights Act that would make some of our practices uniform across this country.
Thanks. And actually, that you kind of anticipated on this question. I mean, how are you going to capture this best practices? Is that part of the program, so to speak, going forward, so that, all these lessons that were learned and these things that work so well, how are you going to do that? What's the process you've got in mind?
Yeah. So after our July election, and as well as after this election, I requested my team to sit down and go one by one through each of these initiatives and say, what did we do? What's the result that we saw? What can we do better? And we're going to be kicking that around soon. I've read through the notes, but we haven't had a meeting about it. But right next to me in that meeting is going to be Isabel Longoria, our new elections administrator, and she's deeply committed to carrying this legacy forward. And I fully expect that she'll be better than I was, because of having experienced what we went through, understanding what's possible. But also, like I said, this team going through the effort that's required to understand how to get even better. And so I'm looking forward to great things from her administration.
So do you see a way to, I know there's organizations of voting registrars and all that stuff nationwide. I mean, is that a resource, or is that something that you can replicate and kind of push that out to folks that are needed? I mean, what do you see for that nationwide? I mean, not just Harris County, but what do you see for that? Because obviously what happened here worked so well. It's such a great opportunity for, everybody. And aside from the voting issues, but we've seen stuff in other states that shouldn't be that way. What's your hope and plan for that?
Well, I think we'll go one by one. I don't have a ton of confidence in these conventions or what have you. But we've taped a number of videos. My successor can continue to do that. We're happy to put this stuff in writing. None of it is or should be secret. And so we'll spread that. But for here, in Texas in particular, it's pretty easy to get together with the elections administrators from the larger counties and talk through the things that we have in common. Again, go over lessons learned. I'm sure that Harris County can pick some things up from what's going on in Austin and Dallas and Bear and everywhere else, and vice versa. But then I think what begs the question is, how do we then get to, LA County and Maricopa County? And there are ways, and we already have relationships going there, but it'll take effort, and it'll take, them wanting to have that conversation, frankly.
Thank you. And this is kind of back to Constable Rosen, and I'm still waiting for the ambassador's question, so you're off the hook for now.
Thank God.
Thank God. I don't know if we'll see. He'll eventually figure out how to type it in there, but not yet. And I have to believe, and I was, like a lot of folks, was concerned, open carry, all kinds of potential for really bad stuff happening at the polls, which fortunately didn't. And from at least someone who's worked polls where law enforcement had to be called, and this is no criticism of who arrived, but if you just get the guy who gets the call, he or she may not handle it the way that they probably should. So how critical and was that something that was easy enough to put through and is going to be able to go forward? Or do you think, given different jurisdictions, all that stuff, are you concerned? Or what do we need to do to make that an important part? Because we got lucky now, but who knows?
Yeah, no, we actually put together a very comprehensive written plan that included not only our department, but all of our partners. And all of those things were discussed. For instance, you're not allowed to videotape inside a polling location, but law enforcement can if we're there for an investigative reason. We had to vet that question. We had to vet carry questions. We had to do all kinds of things. And most importantly, and I failed to mention this earlier, we trained all of our officers. We put out a piece, a piece that we gave to every law enforcement locally that talked about the penal code and the election law code to make them aware of the different codes and what the different laws are. And we had a team at the command center that was versed in that with the district attorney's office. So if we encountered a problem at a polling location, we had a direct line to that DA that understood election law, that understood how it all kind of pieced together. So we had subject matter experts throughout this process. So from that perspective, it was good. We did training of our officers. The most important thing for me is for that person to vote, and what would constitute somebody not being able to vote. And it was a felony, it was a breach of the peace, or it was treason. Those were the three things that would prevent somebody from voting. And so we even talked to our folks about, de-escalation techniques. We talked to our folks about, let's work really hard with this voter and try to get them calmed down, no matter how passionate they are about their politics. Hey, make sure you exercise your right to vote. And, thankfully, we didn't have to arrest anybody. We didn't have to. And so I think that pre-training, that cognitive pre-training of and sensitivity went a long way. And I think there's a movement for going on, not just for voting for that, but I think, that's going to be part of the movement that we're changing as well. So, but it really meant a lot to us to have that pre-training before the polls open of what to do and how important voting was and how to be cognizant of that voting and making sure that, we did everything we could to ensure that voter got to vote. And so, lessons learned. We have all this whole entire group has synced up after post the election to talk about lessons learned and ways that we can improve things. And what did we see along the way that we felt needed to be addressed that wasn't addressed? So I believe very strongly in any kind of a plan, it can always be improved. And so we did that, and we're putting together not only a comprehensive report that we will give once the investigations are done, because I think the public wants to understand if there was anything that went on. So we'll give that that report and be transparent about that. And then, of course, one that we're not sharing will be that lessons learned report and any way that we can improve it. But I think you're right. I think this is something that is going to be a living document for each election.
So, and this, we actually have some legislators on here. Is this something where, we've got leaders who are engaged, who interagency, that we're able to do this? Is this something that there needs to be legislation or interagency agreements? In other words, how do we keep what we got and move it forward in a way that doesn't depend on just great leaders doing it?
Chris, you want that or you want me?
I think the constable is much more skilled in bringing together, agencies across, all these different jurisdictions. I think it's something that he deals with daily, and leadership that he provides across Harris County, particularly in the space of mental health and other items. But I think that particular solution will need to be something that's organic. I don't know that there's a top-down legislative solution that will allow for it, but it's certainly worth thinking about.
And I think that working collaboratively with leaders and future leaders and talked about best practices that were done, and the proof is in the pudding. If something worked and if something was successful and you're constantly improving that organic document, it's going to get better and better and better. And I just think, we even thought as far as the ballot boxes were coming into NRG, I wanted the bomb dogs to sniff every box before that box actually came into the facility. I wanted to make sure that there was nothing that was left unturned. And so are there, putting cameras, we had cameras throughout NRG where all the ballot boxes were placed. We had cameras everywhere there. So everything was so secure and so safe and videotaped, and we had staff out at NRG the entire time. Of course, we protect NRG full time year round in addition to this voting stuff, but making sure that all of those things were thought of. But there's always something that potentially could have been missed, and we are trying to do everything we can to improve it organically. And I think best practices will win at the end of the day. No matter who's in office, people get to see a plan that was executed very well and improved upon, and that becomes the standard by which everybody should sort of follow.
Well, thank you. So we got more than a couple questions. One of them had to do with kind of the issue of the drive-through voting. Obviously, that became kind of scary at the end for everybody, but you got that idea from, I understand, Wisconsin, Chris, and in terms of that going forward, I mean, a lot of folks voted that way. What do you see for drive-through voting?
Yeah, drive-through voting is clearly legal and something that should be utilized and expanded. There was a lot of fear. We were going in front of a federal judge that was known to be one of the more conservative judges, and we were in that hearing for a few hours, and so it might have felt suspenseful to the people outside. But I can tell you that within 5 minutes of that hearing beginning, this judge was laughing at the idea of throwing out 127,000 ballots. It was absurd.
Did you tweet that earlier and get everybody off the hook who was watching?
I tried to leak it to the press that was in the room and have them rapid tweet it out, but I think it made for a more enjoyable day for everybody when we finally heard that news. But in addition to the fact that he wasn't going to throw these ballots out, I mean, he just goes through a plain reading of the Texas Election Code, which stated that for early voting you can use a structure of any sort. It could be a stationary structure, a movable structure. It even contemplates the use of ropes of marking off a structure to be a voting center. And so for these folks to be arguing that these massive tents that we procured to use as a voting center, that were like definitely bigger than New York apartments, it was ridiculous. And so that was never in question. There was a decision that we made, and the judge touched on this. He stated that while they were clearly structures, he didn't know if he could go along with the idea of them serving as buildings, and buildings are what is required on election day. Now, we know from our interaction with the Texas Secretary of State that tent-like structures are used across Texas on election day, like period. What we had here was a terrible failure of leadership from the Secretary of State, who advised us and told us that this was okay. But as soon as Ken Paxton came out and expressed an issue with it, they refused to speak up. And in fact, refused to even take my calls. Like I literally had to call the Secretary of State from someone else's phone so that they would like accidentally pick up so I could talk to them about voting issues. Just a resounding failure of leadership.
Hear you? where you did the crackling thing? It's like, oh, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think I'm losing my signal, but it was awful. And to me, I think another thing that needs to be changed in Texas, there's so many of them, but the Secretary of State needs to be an elected position, because you have this like total lackey of the governor that, frankly, the Secretary of State herself knows nothing about election law. But we talked to her, her director of elections, which is okay if that person was doing his job. But then there's no accountability. And so, that was just really, really embarrassing for government as a whole and for the state of Texas, that the Secretary of State would just disappear on the job.
Well, obviously, you knew you were right when Ken Paxton came out against it on doing it.
That's always a good sign.
Yeah, that is. So, and that actually is one of the questions we had. This wasn't something where it was smooth sailing and there was no opposition. Tell us a little bit about kind of the obstacles that you and the team doing this overcame. And obviously there was some political, but just in general, what were the obstacles that y'all had to overcome to make this happen so well?
Yeah, we faced, I want to say about a dozen lawsuits, most of which were from Hotze and friends. Some of them included the Harris County Republican Party. Some of them included the Texas Republican Party, including the drive-thru voting sites. One of the more ridiculous lawsuits that came from the Harris County Republican Party was that after we fired some election judges for sexual harassment, they were suing us to put these guys back in the voting centers.
You just put them together.
It was,
I
we went through, one of the battles that we lost was the battle to send applications for mail ballots out to everybody in Harris County. Another like very embarrassing twist in Texas law here, but the argument by the Attorney General that the Supreme Court bought was that because the election code does not explicitly say that I can send these out to people without a request on their behalf, that we couldn't do it. And they said that after we had already sent vote by mail applications out to every senior in Harris County twice. And the Secretary of State and the AG were totally okay with it. But when we wanted to send them to younger people, along with very detailed explanations of who's allowed to vote by mail and who's not under Texas law, they fought that, for clearly partisan reasons. And that's not a battle that we won. And that was one of the low points of the election for us. But most of the lawsuits, all of them were frivolous, but most of them were regarded by the courts as frivolous and summarily tossed out. But it was disconcerting that in what's supposed to be a Republican democracy, that you have forces that are 100% focused on making sure that voting is limited to a select few, and that democracy is not truly realized in the way that the founders would have envisioned it. And so, there's a lot of work to do. That's why organizations like this one, folks like Nicole Peterson and so many others are going to be needed, particularly here in Texas, where Republicans feel, power slipping away from their grip. They're going to do everything that they can. They've shown that they're not going to play by the rules. And so we're going to need people who are ready to take part in this fight. You're on mute, Mike.
Mike, let me jump in. There's a question.
I apologize.
Did you get a best reception?
Harris County Democratic. We are the Harris County Democratic not use any invectives that should be inserted here.
Okay.
But I really don't understand it because the whole time we were told that this great turnout was going to be fabulous for us and all of that. And it wasn't from day one. So where is the screw up there?
Okay. Thank you.
That's what we need to address. And did we miss talking to the constituents in Harris County and around the state about the issues that are really disturbing to them?
Okay.
And what's really bothering people, and just miss the boat on that.
Okay.
Furthermore, in the Latino community, we got warnings for what was going on out, in West Texas. Good warnings about putting more funding in there and trying to get out the vote and get organized and all that. None of that was done. That's a state party issue, and they misjudged it.
Okay. Ambassador, I'm gonna let your son-in-law answer that question. So hang on a minute. Thank you for calling me. So hang on, sir. Hold on. So this is the big question. Why does the Democratic Party not do better, Constable Rosen? He was able to call me on my cell phone, so he got in one way or the other. So you need to answer this big question. Please go ahead, Constable.
Well, I mean that really puts me on the spot. I can't contradict anything. No, I'm joking. I don't know. I couldn't really hear the question very well. He was saying that we didn't communicate effectively or well enough with.
Yeah, I think it's one that is at kind of the back of folks' minds is Harris County, there was not a universal. I mean, our numbers rose as Democrats, but there was also a lot of Trump voters out there in Harris County, and then obviously on the border counties. What was the party doing not right or not doing well enough to make sure that this incredible turnout was also an incredible Democratic turnout? So if you could kind of explain the ills of the Democratic Party in the state as our party. And what your solution is, that would be a great way for us to wrap this.
Well, clearly, I mean, I can just say that messaging more unity, messaging ways to bring people together. I think from a voting perspective, I think everything was done that could have been done. So accessibility, safety, making the different times available for people to vote. I don't think there could have been anything else that could have been done. I really don't, at least locally. I just don't think there could have been anything else done that would have been more effective than what was done. So that piece I would disagree, at least locally. On a national level, we still, in Texas, we still have almost a 50-50 divided state. And, the only ways we're going to make gains there is by, again, messaging the hell out of people of why they need to come out and vote and who they need to vote for. And I just don't think, I think people listen to some of the national discussion that Texas was really not in play, that they predict, Republicans were going to win Texas. And, when you start hearing that over and over again, and there's not enough discussion about us taking Texas back and really putting together a narrative about how we can win Texas and the path to win Texas. And this is how you have to do it. And this is how you have to plan. I don't think enough went into that. It's the same thing I've said about tort reform. If people allow people to have their access to the courts taken away and nobody stands up with a counter narrative to that, the narrative's going to win. Tort reformers are going to win every time. And so in this case, I think that we listened to the national people say that Texas was possibly in play. I don't think we did a good enough job to give people the path on this is how we are going to take Texas back and really campaign the hell out of it in order to implement that plan effectively. So I know Biden, I don't think they spent a tremendous amount of money in Texas, but I think we're on the cusp of about to change Texas and make it Democrat. I think we're there. I really do. Some would argue that this is one of the most polarizing elections that we're going to have because, you're either against Trump or you're for Trump and, you're really intractable on that feeling. So, you know, there's some people that are saying that, but I really believe that we need to do, not locally, I think we need to do a better job throughout the state of giving people the path on how to effectively take Texas back. And, you know, poor Ann Richards, we miss her so much. She was really one of those firecrackers leaders that could really get everybody excited about Democrats being the party of Texas. And I think our message is great. I think that we need to be careful not to alienate voters, because everybody's not completely left. Everybody's not completely right. I think there's a lot of center voters that usually make or break elections. I know they do in the presidential race. They make or break an election. So you gotta keep an eye on them as well.
Also,
well, thanks for joining us.
Hey,
Thank you, Nicole. I was actually going to turn it over. Any last closing thoughts you have? And thank you again for all your hard work. Thank you, Constable. Thank you, Nicole. Go ahead. Closing thoughts.
Absolutely. Well, I just wanted to share some numbers of the Harris County Democratic Party, because I agree with Constable Rosen that on a local level, I think things were done right. And I can't speak for the whole state, but I can definitely say that in Harris County, I think the Democrats did a great job. And that's shown by 68% voter turnout. And the fact that Democrats won every single countywide office. HCDP also sent out over 1 million texts, had 1,200 volunteers. You know, the numbers go on and on. So I just want to echo what Constable Rosen was saying, that locally, I think we're right on track.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you. And so, Chris, this is your last chance for anything big, but thank you for joining us. Any kind of closing thoughts or suggestions for the folks that have really, and you haven't seen the chat, but people dig you a lot, obviously.
You know, I think this was just one example of what can be done, you know, with leadership, with real thought about how government could be improved. You know, we did this in, you know, 5 months. You know, June 1st was my first day in office. And you know, we just showed what could be done with a whole lot of energy and effort, you know, geared towards a single goal. And that was to protect the right to vote for the people of Harris County. But this same, you know, way of thinking can be applied to, you know, any number of other government organizations. And so, and that's, I think, what we're fighting for ultimately as Democrats, is to have government that is by the people and for the people. And it takes, you know, we got to win some elections. And so let's come back and have that, you know, that phone call about, you know, some of these numbers and what it means for the future. But then we have to govern. And so, you know, I'm deeply inspired by what we were able to achieve. You know, we all need to be turning our eyes to Georgia right now and doing what we can, whether it's by phone or going out there in person, to pick up some Senate seats and truly allow, you know, our new president to bring us back from the brink that our democracy, you know, has been left at. But no, I think that's it for me. You know, so in about a week's time, I'll be returning to private life. I'll be returning to you know, the work at the party. And, you know, I think I'll be at Herman Park and Gus Wortham a little bit more often as well. But again, thank you all. I know so many people who are on this call, you know, offered your time, offered your energy, whether it was directly to my office or, you know, to some organization that was serving the voters of Harris County. And every single one of those, you know, those ounces of effort was needed. And we're grateful to you for being a part of it.
Perfect. And thank you for ending almost exactly on time, a bit early. So we did a great job with all y'all. I would end, and actually the final segue is right now the Harris County Democratic lawyers and the Texas Democratic lawyers are looking into ways, not just besides money, that we might be able to meaningfully support what's going on in Georgia. Because if we don't have the Senate, it's going to be a lot harder opportunity lost. So we'll find something. We'll send out some emails once we've kind of got some plans for folks that if you can continue to fight for 2 more months, it's really important. Thank y'all. We'll have a CLE set next the first Thursday of December. We'll hopefully have an opportunity, and thank you for joining us today. And thank you again to all the folks that were here today. Thank you.